This is BTV World. I am Syed Shabahat and you are watching Faultlines. Joseph Nye, who coined the term soft power in 1989 as a professor at Harvard University and a former senior defense official. He has recently written an article in New York Times. While commenting on US-China relationship, he said, "A new idea is gaining currency among some politicians and policymakers in Washington. The United States is in a Cold War with China. It's a bad idea. Bad on history, bad on politics, bad for our future." He further said that the Biden administration has wisely pushed back on the framing. But the president's action suggests that his strategy for dealing with China may indeed suffer from Cold War thinking. And Joseph Nye is not alone in his thinking. Many experts are skeptical on future of US dominance in the bigger game. With the recent test of hypersonic missiles, China has again surpassed US by miles, leaving United States weak and vulnerable in yet another field. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
In never-ending quest to develop lethal arms, that newfound scramble for hypersonic weapons might spark the pointless, costly and dangerous arms race among top defense spenders. Hypersonic weapons travel in the upper atmosphere at more than 5 times the speed of sound, or about 6,200 kilometers per hour, and they can evade advanced radar systems, robbing adversaries of reaction time. U.S. Senator Angus King described the new weapon as a strategic game-changer with the dangerous potential to fundamentally undermine strategic stability. Marking a dramatic technological development, the London-based Financial Times reported that Beijing conducted not one, but 2 tests of the new hypersonic weapons in July and August. While commenting on Financial Times report, top U.S. General Mark Milley has called China's recent hypersonic missile test very close to Sputnik Movement, referring to the Soviet Union's launch of a satellite in 1957 that signified their substantial lead in the so-called space race. In response to the Financial Times assertions, China's foreign ministry denied the report and stated that it was a routine test of a space vehicle to verify technology of spacecraft's reusability. The United States has actively pursued the development of hypersonic weapons as part of its conventional prompt global strike program since the early 2000s. In July, Russia reported another successful test launch of Zircon hypersonic cruise missile, a weapon President Vladimir Putin has touted as part of a new generation of missile systems without equal in the world. While this new class of weapon is being developed at rapid pace, a new frontier is also opening up in the quest for military supremacy, that is, outer space.
My first guest in today's program is Eugene Chausovsky from Washington, D.C. He's a geopolitical analyst with Newlines Institute. Chausovsky, the first question I have for you is that why United States administration and the military administration of U.S. Army has declared it a Sputnik movement?
First of all, the technology that China deployed in this hypersonic test is not more advanced than that of the U.S., as was the case of the Soviet deployment of Sputnik in the 1950s. And indeed, the US has already been using forms of this technology in its space program for decades. And also, China has long had the ability to reach the US with nuclear warheads. So this also doesn't necessarily demonstrate a new capability that Beijing didn't already have. However, these hypersonic missile tests do demonstrate an advancement in China's military technology from where it was just a few years ago, which naturally is perceived as a threat by the US.
What do you believe is the message given by China through these tests to United States?
I would say that the message is that China is to be taken seriously as a military and geopolitical power. And as China has pursued technological advancement, it wants to show both domestically and internationally that it is developing greater economic and military capabilities. And finally, on this notion of US interfering in China's affairs. So I think this question of US interference in China on the issue of Taiwan is a matter of interpretation. So obviously, China views it as domestic interference, while the US views Taiwan as an autonomous partner that it must help secure and defend. But in reality, both sides interfere in each other's internal affairs, just as the US and Russia do. But the real question is to what degree both sides are willing to cross each other's respective red lines. And here, as I mentioned previously, I think there are significant constraints that will prevent a full-fledged military conflict in the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much, Eugene Chausovsky, for being my guest in today's program. And my second guest in the program is Caroline Rose. She is Senior Analyst from Newlines Institute based in Washington, D.C. Ms. Rose, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you believe this is a very important and a strong message given by Chinese to the U.S. administration?
Well, certainly, I think that China has been very clear and not want the United States to disrupt its own foreign policy. Also, of course, not interfere in its own internal affairs. That is a big and strategic imperative of China as it advances towards great power competition with the United States.
And there are several theories at the moment when we talk about the problems between the United States and China, and many of the analysts are of the view that this is because of the increasing economic influence of China that the United States is increasingly getting uncomfortable with. What are your comments on that?
The economic influence is a very big part of the source of strain and tension between the United States and China, just because the economic influence that China has exerted in the international system has forced the United States to really recalculate and reassess its strategy on the international system. The United States is used to a Cold War type environment of competition when it approaches big powers. For example, with the Soviet Union, they're very used to military influence and political influence that is exerted in country. This is a whole different ballgame for the United States because it essentially forces the United States to think in economic and infrastructural terms. Something that the U.S. is used to, certainly, but it's something that's completely devoid of values, it's devoid of, democracy promotion. It's just about, influence, just basic influence. And so I think that the United States right now is playing a game of catch-up, certainly trying to understand how China functions, how this economic influence is used, and how the United States can beat China at its own game.
China, on the other hand, has always complained that United States deals with China from a position of strength. This becomes a part of all the diplomatic discourse that takes place and all the one-on-one interactions. United States tries to take a position of strength. Do you believe this is a major reason why we have so far not achieved any major goal when it comes to improving the relationship between the two countries?
I think yes and no. I don't necessarily think that the United States is not approaching our competition from a position of strength. I think that the United States has many advantages in how it engages with China. I think the biggest issue here, and the reason why we have not seen success, at least trying to get China to the table and then also to find middle ground, find consensus. And the reason is because the United States does not understand what game plan is, what their strategy, how to interact, understand how China perceives the world. And I think because of that misconception, I think because of this lack of communication, this has led to a lot of breakdown and tensions and escalation between the two powers. That being said, I also think that you're absolutely right. When China looks to negotiate from a position of strength, it also seeks to blur a line of what rules-based international order is, and that is the system that the United States is used to navigating within. And so I think that China intentionally seeks to undermine rules-based international order to throw the United States, into a state of challenge.
And despite the change of administration, change of president in the United States, the trajectory of relationship of United States with China has remained the same. And on the other hand, we have China, where the continuity of leadership is going on. Xi Jinping is chairman for life. His policy is not going to change. So is there a room for improvement in relationship when it comes to the diplomatic terms of engagements of the two countries with each other?
Unfortunately, I do not see a lot of space for improved or warmed ties in the United States and China. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of space for similar imperatives and similar value sets as well. I think the United States and China continue to grow more and more different in terms of how they approach foreign policy and then what their foreign policy goals are, particularly on the topic of human rights, democracy promotion, preventing genocide. I think that those issues in particular have put an additional strain between the United States and China. That being said, I think that there could be limited cooperation on issues such as climate change, disaster prevention, and then a few other issues. But unfortunately, when it comes especially to the defense sector and to economic influence, the United States will continue to see China as a competitor.
And do you believe that the recent statement of Chinese leadership towards the reunification of China is actually causing more trouble, as United States clearly see things slipping out of hand in the South Chinese Ocean?
Yes, I think that this is, of course, one of the greatest strains between the United States and Beijing. I think that concerning reunification, China has made it incredibly clear that it will not tolerate any interference in what it perceives as its own internal affairs. Same issue with protests in Hong Kong. Some of the developments that happened, the United States wanted, of course, to make China accountable for the actions that happened in Hong Kong. I think that this is going to be one of the biggest sources of strain and flashpoints in the U.S.-China relationship as well, especially how the United States approaches its own defense relations with Taiwan. And I certainly think that if we were going to look at how it would pan out between Washington and Beijing line, I think that Taiwan will play a very big role.
Thank you very much, Caroline Rose, for being guest in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest in the studio to speak on the Chinese aspect of the crisis is Brigadier retired Abdurehman Tarar. He is a very well-read author and a strategic expert of the affairs relating to China. Brigadier sir, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Spad, for having me on your program.
And you just heard what the sentiment is there in Washington, D.C. Not only the polity at large, but also the think tanks are of the view that this is a very serious escalation to sabotage the peace between the two countries.
Sabat, I think that this term used by U.S. Chief of Staff initially, that test of hypersonic missile by China is a Sputnik-like event. But I personally feel that now you will very often hear this term, maybe with some additions like China has overtaken, China has outsmarted, China has outpaced, or China is miles ahead in different fields. I personally feel that this is how the American think tanks, they create and then maintain their relevance in Washington, D.C. by raising temperature and creating such environment in which the administration is compelled to take certain strategic action. If you see Chinese approach towards various technological developments, and I think strategic experts should understand that China has now entered in the era of innovation, and this will not limit only to this one hypersonic missile test, but I think every now and then they will come up with new inventions in not only the military hardware, but in almost all the fields. And there will be like every month there will be a Sputnik event, if it is termed as such.
So you believe that the military dominance of China will be a very open fact for the entire world, and they'll keep going forward in the same direction?
I personally, if you ask me, I don't think that Chinese are at this moment looking for military dominance, or at this moment they are aiming at challenging Americans. But every now and then they come up with a new weapon system or a new invention in which they just keep conveying their message that we are preparing for any future conflict. But if you ask me specifically in the field of military hardware, then the Chinese are very good in one thing, and that is bridging the technological gap. Now they are in a phase in which they have outpaced Americans in surface ship construction and different AI fields, supercomputers, and other weapon systems. So, but Chinese, they believe that somewhere close to 2050 they will be able to match the American technology. However, the American experts or people sitting in American capital, they are actually anticipating that this one test of supersonic missile is challenging the American supremacy.
But Rahman Sahib, why is space becoming such an important place for all these superpowers? Why the space has become a significant war zone? Because previously we used to see countries facing each other in naval, in air force, in military, three conventional kind of armies we had. What is the significance of space in today's war science?
In future weapons, AI has a very important role to play.
Okay.
And especially big powers like China and America, they will keep displacing their war machines to different zones in the world. So to have secure communication without interruptions, satellites are very important. And at the same time, every now and then you must be seeing on various news channels, every country is pursuing weapons which are autonomous, weapons which are pilotless, drones, and these things. And all these weapons need secure communication. So for this, satellites are very important. And at the same time, for intelligence gathering and keeping an eye on the enemy, satellites are very important. So therefore, future of warfare has serious dependence on satellites, and countries, those who will have their own capability of satellites, will definitely have an edge.
United States also has an edge of being a dominant power in the cyberspace. The internet used in the world, most of the social media apps, above all Google, world's fastest search engine, all of this is based in the United States, and that certainly gives the United States a lot of leverage over the other countries. Do you believe China would be able to take on versus United States in this space of cyber technology?
Sabahat, independent observers of this cyber technology or cyberspace, from last few years, they are of the opinion that China has already surpassed in the field of supercomputers, speed of various processors. But officially, Chinese do not commit any achievement of the sort, because they think that their vendors will have some issues of sanctions from Western world or Western manufacturers. However, recently there was news in the Western media that Chinese supercomputer has 60,000 times more speed than any existing supercomputer in the West, and that is a very, very significant development, and it will definitely impact what we are going to see in the cyber warfare or cyberspace in future. At the same time, China has a very robust control, domestic as well. And some Western observers, they say that the Chinese secure communication is a bigger defensive wall than that ancient Chinese wall.
Okay.
So Great Wall, they say that cyber Great Wall.
Yeah, and importantly, if all of this is happening, I mean, we are seeing them competing each other in different areas. Do you see the tension between the two diluting in any time in future between the United States and China?
Sabahat, I personally feel that Chinese leadership is very mature and they do not act on minor issues coming up here and there are deliberate instigations in South China Sea or maybe in Taiwan or in Korean Peninsula. They have their long-term plans and they have their long-term objectives. And if you talk to Chinese people, those who are in the policy circles, they don't even think that they will be fighting a war with USA, because they, despite this fact that they are they have already entered in the age of innovation, but they have not disconnected themselves from their traditional philosophy and traditional way of thinking, and still they believe that fighting a war and defeating a enemy militarily is no good strategy. So they would, I think, challenge any opponent in the fields of economy, in the fields of technology, and maybe tomorrow in the diplomatic field as well, because this recent COVID outbreak has demonstrated that when rest of the world was looking inward, and especially when the leaders of the world, they were forced to look inward, there was only one country, China, who was itself seriously affected, was there to look after the interest of rest of the world, especially the third world and the poor countries.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Abdurehman, for being my guest in today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take a break and join you with the next segment of the program. Stay with us. Political crisis has entered a new phase with recent military intervention in Sudan. The long-standing differences between the political and military powers regarding the post-revolutionary process resulted in a military coup. On 25th October, Sudan's top general, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, ordered the dismissal of the government and the termination of the Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdouk's position, as well as the detention of many high-level political officials. Al-Burhan announced in his statement that the administration would be handed over to civilian government following a rather quick transition period. There are some interesting external factors in the episode of the military intervention. Some analysts are of the view that the US was seriously disturbed by Moscow's agreement with the military administration in Sudan and offered large-scale financial and military aid to Khartoum in order to cancel that agreement. The agreement was giving Russia the opportunity to increase its military presence in Sudan and to establish a military base on Red Sea, thereby arousing serious concerns for not only United States but also other regional actors. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my guest to the program.
Sudan, once the largest and one of the most geographically diverse states in Africa, has long been beset by conflict. The October 25th ousting of the civilian-led government in Sudan derailed a political process that was an exceptional crescendo in the Horn of Africa region, bedeviled by dictatorship and conflict. The dissolution of Sudan's Sovereign Council country's civilian-military cohabitation not only tarnished Sudan's international standing but also imperiled essential debt relief and international aid, jeopardized prospects of peace with rebels in Darfur and the Nuba Mountains. Tens of thousands of civilians continue to protest the ousting of Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, and the country is set for serious confrontation which could spiral out of control. The African Union, the United Nations, the East African Regional Body IGAD and all of the Sudan's Western donors have condemned the coup and called for a return to civilian rule. Commenting on the impasse, regional expert Alex de Waal recently said it was naive to believe that Sudan, which has never managed to agree on a common vision for its identity or political system in the last 60 years, would achieve some kind of national unity soon. Historian Richard Cockett, in his book Sudan, The Failure and Division of an African State, wrote the tendency to fragment and splinter has been the Achilles heel of Sudan's politics since independence in 1956. Back in July 2019, following the violent events, the quartet of the US, the UK, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, in collaboration with the African Union, stepped in to press for a negotiated settlement, which followed the next month, and similar on Sproker is required now to navigate power-sharing possibilities.
My guest in the program from United Kingdom, Julius Mbaluto, famous broadcast journalist and expert of African affairs. Julius, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
And before we speak about the recent military intervention, please give us a brief background of Omar al-Bashir's government that lasted 30 years after a revolution in 2019.
Yeah, just a quick one. 1989, Omar Bashir came to power through, as we used to call it, through the barrel of the gun. That definitely means coup. And since he came into power, Sudan has never been the same, because in his reign as president, he was a military president who lasted for rather too long, over 30 years. But even before he came back to through the coup, Sudan in Africa has experienced more coups than any other country, over 17 coups, some successful, others not. And then coming to power through this kind of method meant he had to always do whatever he did to cling to power, because when you come through to power as a military dictator, most of the time you do exercise extreme measures to make sure that you kill all your threats, you fight all your enemies just to stay in power. And one of the, just Omar Bashir, like any other military coup dictator, he lived with worry, because most of the time when you go back to the history of Africa, all coups that happened, it ended up like it's a coup after coup after coup. So most of his life, I think he tried to rule trying to seek loyalty from, the soldiers, because it is the soldiers who had the power to overturn him. And actually, chickens came to roast. In the end, they are the ones who overturned him. No, it's not the ones. They are not the ones. It's uprising. Because as we all know, Sudan has never had a civilian government since independence, 1956. And therefore, people tired of dictatorship had to really go to the streets, protests. And then, military came, they hijacked the revolution. We call it revolution, and the rest is history. So Omar Bashir goes back in the history of books, dictatorship. He committed all these crimes against humanity. He was wanted by ICC. Warrant of arrest had been actually issued by ICC, but African countries didn't effect it. So while he was like, if you show up in a different country, you should be arrested, Omar Bashir would go to different countries. The presidents there, they don't even effect any arrest. And he kept on just walking with impunity, because it's like, no country can effect his warrant of arrest. You go to meetings and you just leave freely, as if nothing happened. So all the atrocities he committed, if you go back to the history of Sudan, Sudan was once a big country. But the government in the north, they fought until Sudan broke away to give birth to the current smallest country in the world, South Sudan. So his legacy, all these years of war, of committing
military
atrocities,
council
it was just
and the civilian setup that was running in parallel with them. Can you explain how the power was divided and what problems did they have with each other?
Yeah, the dynamics of Sudan and just some countries in Africa, Sudan, northern part of Sudan is predominantly occupied by people from Muslim faith. In the south is Christian faith. It's a bit similar story to some countries in Africa. And therefore, there was this sectarian violence going on. And because, Omar Bashir, the government in northern Sudan, had the power. They had the power because they had the government. Too much of overwhelming to the south. So they carried on fighting until there was a breakaway. So became two different countries. Separation happened. And the rest is history, South Sudan today is a different country. Sudan, as it used to be known, is also a different country, but with a bit of its land seceding to become a different country. So mostly it was sectarian violence, but away from sectarian violence, the government in the north was using extreme measures to fight off anyone who was opposed to it.
Mbaluto, we are also looking at from an external angle, the rift between United States and Russia is putting a strong foothold inside Sudan. We also have seen from some international papers that have been published on this issue that Russia and the United States were supporting two different factions. Both of these factions were simultaneously influential. And this apparently is also a byproduct of the involvement of the international actors. Do you agree with this statement?
I definitely say there's an element of truth into it, and this is because I've seen that different examples in different countries. As we are speaking right now, Sudan, it's kind of not stable country. Now, most of the time you have international actors coming in definitely to gain a foothold. Most of their big business thrives in crisis in Africa, and Sudan happens to be the same. Let me also point out that, to just give you a typical example, and it's on the record. At the time, Omar Bashir was committing atrocities against Sudanese in the south. United Nations came and put an embargo, which meant no country was supposed to sell arms to Sudan. But behind the scene, we had actually China selling weapons to government in the north. But the same China was also working with the government of southern Sudan, because southern Sudan happens to be where the oil in the country is there, in plenty. And therefore just double doing business there. So when you look into what is a country of interest, in terms of analysis in the previous, areas of life, a country of interest to international community happens to be a country with resources. And most of the time, these countries of interest never experiences political stability, because then the interest of these international actors cannot stand a proper functioning government, because they will definitely be challenged. So the more the chaos thrives, the more they exploit.
I'm sorry, but I have to take this a bit quickly. What do you think is the economic outlook of Sudan at the moment? Because I was seeing in one of the publications that I went through for this program, it states that debt relief of $50 billion was on guard by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. So how's the outlook, and how's the debt burden of the country?
Right now, the economy is in dire strait. It's just in a bad state. Look at it this way. Yeah, all these sanctions. The Africa Union kicked Sudan out of the Union. Africa Union. EU countries have said no. US withdrew support aid to Sudan, and you have a government whereby you just military leader here, and who doesn't have any favors from these other different countries. So therefore, at the moment, if it carries on, the economy is just going to collapse because, and also people are protesting. Most of them are protesting. They're not. They don't seem to ready to say we give up, because remember, it was their revolution that drew their attention. It was their revolution that kicked out Omar Bashir from power. But the military that hijacked the revolution promised a transitional government, which now they also came and also hijacked that as well. So Sudanese, when I look around, their primary duty right now is to keep protesting until they get the government they were looking for right now. Now, if that be the case, then you see conflict going on. Military will try to subdue the protests, and it's like also then international support is lacking there. And also you have all these actors, as you talked about, Russia with an interest to build a military base in Sudan, also in conflict with US as well, because you see US tends to be the one that wants to build military bases in these African countries. And it's all about dominance, power, presence, and all that. So economy of Sudan faces a big challenge as we speak right now. If they don't act together, even if there's no proper functioning government soon, things will just get worse.
And Mbaluto, how do you see these protests going on all over the world? We saw protests in New York, protests in Paris, protests in London. The diaspora of Sudanese all over the world is protesting. Do you believe this is going to have an impact on the military leadership, given the fact that the United States has taken a stern notice of it and is also going to consider some economic sanctions on Sudan?
I believe this time, I sometimes I try to imagine myself being Sudanese, and I just imagine since the independence of Sudan, 1956, not even one single civilian government, and they've experienced over 17 coups, and I'm like, if I was living in such a country, I've just been so fed up because military rulership is full of dictatorship, and by the way, it's not the best. You suspend a whole constitution. A constitution is the agreement between citizens and the country. It's so powerful. But a military dictatorship, they'll come and they bend the constitution. So therefore, you feel your rights are being really violated. And if you are Sudanese, wherever you are, whether on the ground or you are in the diaspora, definitely your primary responsibility is, say, for us to keep on claiming to be citizens of this country, for us to continue to claim ownership to this country, we have to see democracy. For the first time, we have to see democracy. So I see a situation whereby, yes, the military hijacked the revolution. If they were carrying on, to just stand of a transitional government, which will end up in a civilian government, then yeah, it would have been fine. But now they messed up that. So therefore, I don't see citizens of Sudan trusting them again. So probably they'll keep going on. The only advantage they have now, these citizens of Sudan, is because the whole world seems to be rallying behind them. And as you shared there, US sanctions and all that.
Thank you, Julius. Thank you, Julius, for being again on my program. This was very insightful. Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Sudan are protesting for the reinstatement of democracy in their country. Democracy, something they have been deprived of for last all 30 or 32 years of their national history. On the conclusion or on the closing of this program, I would repeat a statement of Jeffrey Feltman, who is Special Envoy of the United States for the Horn of Africa. Recently addressing a press talk, he said, "To those freedom-loving Sudanese and to those who would seek to rob them of their democratic ambition, I will say the world is watching." We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.